He talked about years passing gently, about affection that still existed but no longer surprised them, about how he wondered if openness could bring truth instead of distance, and Claire listened, her heart beating louder with every sentence, feeling pulled between trust and fear, because she loved him deeply and had built a life on that love, a life of shared mornings, shared plans, shared silences, and the idea of opening a door she had never even touched made her feel exposed, not excited, and she asked what would happen if feelings changed, if curiosity became regret, if something once imagined could not be undone, and Daniel did not rush his answer, telling her that choice mattered more than action, that nothing would ever happen without care, honesty, and respect, that he wanted conversation, not chaos. But even as he spoke, Claire felt a strange awareness settle over her, a memory of recent moments she had brushed aside too quickly, small things like laughter that lingered too long during neighborhood talks, like feeling understood in ways she had not expected, and as Daniel watched her face closely, sensing that his words had opened more than a discussion, Claire realized with sudden clarity that this was not just a question about boundaries, but about feelings that already existed beneath the surface, unspoken but real, and outside the rain continued to fall, steady and patient, as if giving them time. While Claire's thoughts drifted to the familiar street, to the people they waved to every day, to one person in particular whose presence had become quietly meaningful without her permission, and she wondered when exactly comfort had turned into awareness, when ease had turned into attention, and Daniel, noticing the pause, asked her what she was thinking, and she almost answered honestly, almost spoke a name she had not said aloud in this context, but instead she said she needed time, because some questions change the air in a room forever, and Daniel nodded, accepting the pause without pressure, unaware that the very thing he was inviting into words had already begun shaping their lives. Because desire rarely announces itself loudly. It arrives softly, through shared glances, through moments that feel harmless until they are not. And as the night deepened and the city lights blurred behind glass, both of them sat with thoughts they could not yet organize, not knowing that the answer to Daniel's question was not an idea or a stranger or a fantasy, but someone already close, someone whose life was quietly connected to theirs, someone whose presence would soon turn a careful conversation into a test of hearts, trust, and choices neither of them had prepared for. And in that silence, before anything truly began, everything had already changed. The next weeks moved faster than Claire expected, as if the quiet question Daniel had asked had pushed time forward, and suddenly, every ordinary moment felt sharper, more noticeable, especially the ones that involved their neighbors. Emily and Mark Reynolds, who lived just 2 houses down and had always been part of the background of their lives, friendly but distant, familiar without being close, until now, when even small encounters seemed to carry meaning. Like the afternoon Claire ran into Mark while checking the mail and they ended up talking longer than planned about work stress, about aging parents, about how life slowly becomes a list of responsibilities instead of dreams, and Mark listened in a way that felt rare. Not trying to fix anything, just understanding, and Claire walked back inside feeling lighter and unsettled at the same time, wondering why a simple conversation stayed with her longer than it should have, while Daniel, from the living room, noticed the quiet change in her mood but said nothing, storing the observation away like a note he might need later. And as days passed, these moments repeated themselves in different forms, a shared laugh during a neighborhood barbecue, a quiet joke while clearing plates, a glance that lasted half a second too long before turning away, nothing obvious, nothing improper, but enough to make Claire more aware of her own thoughts, because she had always believed attraction was loud and clear, yet this felt subtle, emotional, almost innocent, which somehow made it harder to ignore, and she tried to ground herself by focusing on Daniel, on their routines, on the love that still existed between them, but even that love felt different now, stretched by honesty, by awareness, by the strange permission that had entered their marriage without a clear shape. And meanwhile Emily watched from her own quiet distance, noticing changes she could not fully name, seeing how Mark seemed more present after certain conversations, how his eyes followed Claire when he thought no one noticed, and though Emily trusted her husband, she trusted her instincts more, and those instincts told her something was shifting beneath the surface, not betrayal, not yet, but emotional movement, the kind that begins long before anyone admits it. And one evening, when the 4 of them sat together around a small fire pit, the air filled with laughter and the smell of wood smoke. Daniel watched Claire carefully as she spoke, her hands moving freely, her face lit in a way he had not seen in years, and instead of jealousy, he felt something unexpected, a quiet fear mixed with realization, because this was what he had meant when he spoke about being seen differently, but seeing it in real life felt heavier than imagining it, and Mark, seated across from him, felt that weight too, aware of Daniel's gaze, aware of his own feelings growing clearer with every shared moment, and he tried to pull back, to remind himself of the life he had built with Emily, of promises made and years shared, but emotions do not follow rules easily, especially when they are fed by understanding and shared silence. And later that night, after the laughter faded and everyone returned to their homes, Daniel mentioned casually how alive Claire seemed during the evening, not accusing, not teasing, just stating what he had seen, and Claire did not deny it, because denying it would mean lying to herself, and the honesty of that moment scared her more than any argument could have, because it meant something real was forming without intention. And while Daniel lay awake beside her, thinking about the risks of curiosity, Emily lay awake beside Mark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the growing distance between them and wondering when exactly it had started, whether it was something she had missed or something she could still stop. And the next day, small choices became heavier: who to talk to, how long to stay, what not to say, because now everyone felt the edge of something unspoken, and Claire found herself replaying conversations in her mind, not for the words but for the feeling they left behind, the feeling of being understood without explanation, and she wondered if that meant something was missing in her marriage, or if it simply meant she was human. And Daniel, watching her from his own quiet space, began to realize that opening doors is easy, but guiding what walks through them is not. And as the neighborhood returned to its normal rhythm of morning walks and polite smiles, an invisible line had already begun to blur, connecting 4 lives in ways none of them had planned, and somewhere between shared coffees, casual greetings, and unspoken thoughts, the story shifted from curiosity to consequence, even though no one had yet said a word out loud. The truth did not arrive suddenly but crept into the open through tired eyes, quiet pauses, and emotions that could no longer stay hidden, and it was Emily who finally gave it a voice when she invited Claire over one quiet afternoon. The house unusually silent, as if it understood the weight of what was coming, and as they sat across from each other with untouched coffee growing cold, Emily spoke without anger, saying she felt something shifting, that she noticed how Mark listened more closely to Claire, how his mood lifted after their talks, and how she herself felt pushed slightly to the side, not replaced but overlooked, and Claire felt her chest tighten because there was nothing she could deny without lying. And instead of defending herself, she admitted that she felt the pull too, not physical, not reckless, but emotional, the kind that grows through shared understanding and quiet support. And the honesty between them broke something open, because Emily did not accuse or shout, she simply asked what it meant and where it was going, and Claire had no clear answer, only the truth that nothing had crossed a line yet, but feelings were standing close to it. And at the same time, in another living room not far away, Daniel sat with Mark in heavy silence before Mark finally admitted what he had been holding back, that his marriage felt distant, that conversations at home had become practical instead of personal, and that Claire made him feel heard in a way he had missed for a long time. And Daniel listened carefully, feeling a mix of understanding and regret, because this was the real result of the door he had opened, not excitement or fantasy, but complicated human emotion. And instead of anger, he asked Mark what he wanted, and Mark did not know, because wanting connection did not mean wanting to destroy his marriage. And as both conversations unfolded separately, the same truth emerged, that none of them were villains and none of them were innocent. They were simply people reacting to unmet needs, and that realization made everything heavier, because it meant there was no easy choice. And later that evening the 4 of them came together, not planned, not dramatic, just drawn by the need to speak honestly before silence caused more harm. And the conversation was difficult but calm, filled with pauses and careful words, and Emily spoke about fear, about losing what she had built, while Daniel spoke about curiosity and responsibility, and Claire spoke about confusion and guilt, and Mark spoke about loneliness. And for a moment the room held all of it without breaking, and it became clear that what they were facing was not about permission or boundaries but about what kind of lives they wanted to protect. And as the night stretched on, no decisions were made, no promises broken, but something important shifted, because once emotions are named they cannot pretend to be harmless anymore, and when they finally went their separate ways, each couple returned home changed, carrying questions that demanded answers, and as Daniel lay awake beside Claire, he understood that watching someone he loved be seen by another came with a cost he had not fully understood, and as Emily lay awake beside Mark, she wondered whether love could be repaired or whether it had simply been neglected for too long. And in that quiet space between honesty and action, all four of them stood at the edge of a future that could still go many ways, knowing that the next choice would define not just what they felt, but who they would become. The days that followed were heavy, but clear, as if honesty had swept away confusion and left only hard choices behind, and instead of rushing towards something dramatic, all four slowed down, because they understood that acting on emotion without care would leave damage that could not be repaired, and Emily was the first to speak plainly to Mark, telling him she did not want to lose their marriage to silence and distance, admitting her own mistakes, the way she had stopped asking deeper questions and assumed stability meant happiness, and Mark listened with humility, realizing that the attention he felt with Claire came not from romance alone but from a longing to be known again, and that longing belonged first in his own home, while Daniel, facing his own reflection, admitted to Claire that curiosity had blinded him to risk, that the idea of watching from a safe place had ignored how real feelings grow, and Claire, relieved to hear honesty instead of control, told him she did not want permission to drift away. She wanted a reason to stay connected, and those conversations were not soft or easy, but they were necessary, because they pulled love back from the edge of fantasy into reality, and within weeks Emily and Mark began counseling, not because everything was broken, but because something important had been neglected, and Daniel and Claire made changes too, choosing presence over comfort, rebuilding closeness through intention rather than habit, and slowly the tension that once lived between the four neighbors faded into something quieter and more respectful, and though they still saw each other on morning walks and waved from driveways, the unspoken weight lifted, replaced by understanding and boundaries that felt earned rather than forced, and Claire noticed that the feelings she once struggled to name began to loosen their grip, not erased but transformed into a gentle awareness of what might have been and why it could not be, and Daniel, watching her find herself again, understood that what he had truly wanted was not to watch her be desired by someone else, but to see her alive within their marriage, and Emily, finding her voice again, felt strength return where doubt had lived, while Mark learned that being understood starts with speaking honestly at home, and life did not become perfect or dramatic after that, it became real, filled with effort and choice, and months later, on another quiet evening with rain tapping against the windows, Claire and Daniel sat together in comfortable silence, not because they had nothing to say, but because they no longer feared saying it, and Claire realized that some desires arrive not to be fulfilled, but to reveal what is missing, and when faced with care, they do not destroy love, they refine it, and as the neighborhood lights glowed softly outside, the four lives connected by one risky question moved forward intact, changed but wiser, having learned that love is not proven by how far it stretches, but by when it knows to stop, turn back, and choose home.